Along with Dr. Perry's talk, we're actually going to have 7 other great talks throughout the year, including another one from our very own Yantina from the biology department. But it basically crosses a wide variety of areas of science, including such as, for example, our November speaker who will be talking about medicine and birch bark. We'll be talking about whether or not, or the impact of winter as on the resilience of ticks. And finally, later on, we'll have a conversation linked to the use of nanotechnology for medical diagnostics and treatment. Now, in terms of NSIS, importantly, not surprisingly, the NSIS is looking forward to another season of, let's say, supporting students and scientists through these lectures. And we do other things such as science fair support, science and technical writing competitions, as well as conference awards. So for those of you who are young and aspiring researchers, I advise you or strongly recommend that you take a look at our social media pages, including our direct website, the Instagram, as well as the Facebook pages to see all the new and upcoming events that the NSIS will be hosting. Now, before we actually talk directly about our talk today, it's important for us to acknowledge where we are. So importantly, then, we should acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki. We are in the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all Treaty people, and we are settlers in this land. And as such, we have a responsibility to truth and reconciliation. Now, finally, before I present our speaker and our first speaker of the series, I'd like to note that audience members, you are welcome to ask questions throughout the actual talk as well as at the end. And please bear with me as I give a not so quick blurb about Dr. Perry. And apologies, I have to look at my notes because there's quite a bit. So, Dr. Jennifer Perry, she completed her PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Toronto in 2010. Over the next decade, Dr. Perry called England home, where she held a variety of research fellowships at several notable institutes, including Oxford and the University College London. She joined our St. FX and the Department of Biology in 2022 and was recently promoted to the position of Associate Professor. As we will soon learn more about Dr. Perry's area of research, which involves the insect evolutionary ecology, which studies how the environment influences rapid evolutionary changes in insects, leading to their enormous diversity and ecological importance. For example, we depend on pollinators such as bees and insects, as our economies are affected by agricultural and forest pests. And insects, they serve obviously as an important food source for many birds and fish and mammals that support a healthy ecosystem in the Maritimes and far beyond. Her expertise has made her an amazing teacher, mentor, and supervisor, having trained dozens of students from PhDs to undergrads. And it should be no surprise that Dr. Perry is a highly respected leader in her field with a substantial number of publications, invited talks, conference presentations, and too many awards and fellowships to count. However, I will make special note of not long after completing her PhD, Dr. Perry received the Christopher Barnard Award for Outstanding Contributions by a new investigator from the Association for the Study of Animal Behavior, and more recently, she received an NSERC Discovery Grant, one of the largest in St. FX histories, which is supporting her work on the reproductive biology of insects. So it should come as no surprise that Dr. Perry's talk today, well, is on the surprising social lives of insects. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Jennifer Perry. So I think you should be good.
Hi, everybody. Let's double check. So there we go. The audio coming through? Okay, super. Well, thanks very much, Derek. That was a really kind introduction. Thank you, everybody, for being here today in the room and online. Derek mentioned that I joined SciFX 3 years ago. I'm from Nova Scotia. I'm from Cape Breton originally. It's truly a joy to be back in Nova Scotia, to be able to study the bugs of this province, to be able to share stories about insect biology here with you tonight. I want to thank the Nova Scotia Institute of Science for inviting me to talk about insects with you. So I will talk about the social lives of insects. And when we think about a social animal, if we think of any species besides our own, we're probably thinking of a mammal, a primate, maybe a dolphin, a vertebrate that lives in social groups that we see a lot of on nature documentaries. And those kinds of animals are really wonderful and have lots of fascinating behavior going on. But it is my contention that insects have equally rich and complex social lives that are interesting to study and learn about. And when we think about social insects, possibly, one of the first things that comes to mind is or an ant, something that lives in a complex society where the different individuals have different roles and can cooperate together. And the social insects are really wonderful. But I will not talk about them at all tonight, because I want to tell you about the social lives of non-social insects. Insects that we don't normally think about in that kind of way. Okay. Such as the European earwig. So here's an animal that, just like many other insects, is monitoring aspects of its environment, including other members of its species. And it's detecting who it's interacting with, family members, rivals, competitors, allies, and it's reacting to and adjusting its behavior according to who it's interacting with. And just to give you one example, so this animal is one of the few insects with complex parental care. The European earwig is found throughout the Maritimes. Possibly you may notice fewer earwigs around this year. Earwigs are sensitive to drought conditions and they have had a hard time. But here, what we're seeing is a female earwig that has carved out space, a little den. She's laid her eggs in that den. And once her eggs hatch, she'll go out and forage for food, bring it back to her offspring, protect them from parasites and predators, maintain the den for them as they develop. So there's this rich repertoire of family life going on. And I'll talk about some other examples of cooperative family interactions. It's not all about cooperation and care. We also have the dark side of insect social life. Things like aggression and manipulation and deception and murder and cannibalism. And I'll touch on those kinds of aspects of insect social life too. Work in my lab is all about insect behavior and evolution. We study aspects of insect reproduction and nutrition. We look at the molecular regulation of those kinds of behaviors. We look at the genes underlying those behaviors. Some of the work I won't talk about today is about how insects are responding to the warming climate we're experiencing here in Nova Scotia. Talk about some of their work throughout this presentation. So why should we do any of this work? As Derek mentioned already, there's lots of ways that insects have foundational impact on our lives. Through vectors of disease like mosquitoes, the impacts on our health. This image is of a mosquito that is common in Nova Scotia freshwater ecosystems. The picture is taken by Nova Scotia entomologist David McCorkadale. There's also lots of other pests that affect agriculture and forestry industries. Perhaps you've seen the Japanese beetle around this summer, really an invasive species really taking off in the province. Of course, it's not all negative though. We depend on pollinators for food. We also benefit from other kinds of insects that help us control pests, insects like ladybugs. So there's lots of ways that insects are important to our lives, but also beyond this, insects represent an incredible part of the diversity in the natural world. There's about 1 million species of insects that we know about to date, and that represents about 60% of all animal species. In fact, mammals represent only 6,400 species, just the tiniest fraction of animal life. So a lot of the natural world is insect species. And that leads to statements like this classic conclusion from Robert May, British biologist, to a first approximation. All animals are insects. And he's wrong. And then we have the social media up-to-date version of that statement, that almost all animal life is bugs. So for the rest of the talk, I'll tell you some stories about the social lives of insects. So I'll talk about stories of parents and offspring, interactions between siblings, between rivals and competitors, interactions between mates. I'll talk about some insects that myself and my group have studied, things like water striders, ladybugs, and fruit flies. And I'll also talk about other bugs that we don't study ourselves, but that are really interesting for their social life. And let's start off with one of those bugs. This is the burying beetle. We have these guys here in Nova Scotia, and they're another animal like the earwig that has a really interesting family life. In burying beetles, males and females form a pair bond. They find a dead animal, like a small mouse or another rodent. They carefully prepare the carcass of that dead animal. They shave off all its fur. They remove its internal organs. They deposit an antimicrobial saliva and other secretions on top of the surface that slows its decomposition. And they lay their eggs on that prepared carcass, which they've buried underground. So this is a really important ecosystem service. They are helping the decomposition of dead things in our environments. While our eggs hatch and their larvae are developing, they take care of those larvae. They work together to feed them, to protect them from predators and parasites. They also keep track of how many larvae there are. If they feel there are too many for the size of the mouse, they'll devour some of their offspring along the way. So we have an example where there is care going on, but also there is cannibalism as well. Along a similar kind of line, here is a bug that we study in my group. Up in the left, we have the Asian ladybug, Harmonia axiovitis, and it's like other ladybugs in that it lays its eggs in groups like that on the lower left there. So we've got a clutch of eggs. And an interesting part of ladybug biology is that not all of those eggs are going to hatch. So ladybug mothers lay some eggs that will never hatch. They'll never develop an embryo. But what does happen is when other larvae hatch, they ingest those eggs. And that's what's happening in the middle photograph here. We have a first instar larva, kind of looks like a small dragon. It has just emerged from its egg capsule, and it is eating an egg that it has not developed. That's right next to it. You can see its body is kind of filling up with yolk. And those kinds of trophic eggs, those nutritious eggs that mothers are providing, are a really important part of a good start in life if you're a first instar ladybug. One reason is what we can see in this picture on the right here. Here we have a first instar ladybug, the black bug in the middle, and it's next to some of its natural prey. It naturally feeds on pea aphids. And what we can see is that, it's about the same size as a baby pea aphid that's just emerged, a small bug at the bottom. But that ladybug is much smaller than adult pea aphids, and it has essentially no chance of catching and eating one of those larger aphids. So first instar ladybugs have a tough time developing, and getting to eat an egg, it gives them a huge advantage in early life. So we've got that kind of parental care. That's a form of parental care that mothers are provisioning their offspring. But it doesn't stop there, because we also have the situation where first instar larva, a ladybug hatches from its egg, and it doesn't just devour those eggs around it that are not developing. It will also devour any siblings that are still in the egg capsule, but that haven't yet emerged. And that is what we're seeing on the right here. That darker egg has an embryo in it that would have emerged as another ladybug larva, but it is being eaten by its sibling. So, that might be part of a maternal strategy. If you want your siblings to stop eating each other, you need to give them something else to eat instead. Here we have another case of cannibalism within the family. So we have those kinds of interesting family interactions between parents and offspring, between siblings, and lots of different insects. Let's take a look at another aspect of social life. In lots of animals, including lots of insects, an important part of life is competition for resources. Competition with other members of your species that need exactly the same kinds of things to succeed that you do. So one response to that kind of competition is aggressive behavior. And in my lab, we have studied aggressive behavior in fruit flies. So what we're seeing here is a disc of food that's brown in the center of this arena. And we are seeing two male fruit flies duke it out for control of that patch of food. We are seeing them display moves like hitting at each other with their forelegs. They're lunging at each other. They will continue to fight until one of them is left standing and dominates the food patch. And you can see the other one taking off there. So that kind of aggression, might not be the first thing we think of when we see fruit flies in our kitchen. But there's this really interesting array of competitive behaviors in fruit flies. And it's not limited to males. Females are aggressive too. So here's another arena. And here we have two female fruit flies. They fight in a different way from male. Their signature move is a headbutt towards each other. I know that's happening super fast, so let's slow it down so we can see in more detail. One female lunging at each other, driving the other female off the food patch. So one thing we have been able to show in my lab is that males regulate their aggression depending on aspects of their environment. And one part of their environment is the diet that they experience throughout life. So this was work conducted by Danny Edmonds, who did a PhD on fruit fly behavior in my lab. One of the things that Danny was interested in is how diet affects aggression. So here we're looking at an experiment where Danny manipulated the diet that males experienced early in life. So they either had a low quality diet, medium quality diet, high quality diet, a good start or a bad start early in life. And what this figure is showing is that when males got a high quality diet, a really good diet, they were more likely to display fights and aggressive behavior towards other males. Is that a hand going up? Or? Oh, okay, sorry. Anyone's welcome to ask a question. So I just wanted to encourage anyone who's got a question to jump in. So these data are telling us that if you get good nutrition early in life, and you're a male fruit fly, you're more likely to display aggression towards other males. And that kind of, we can make sense of that. If you get good food early in life, you probably have a bigger body. Perhaps you're more likely to win a fight and be able to dominate a resource. Danny also looked at how food later in life affects aggressive behavior. So what we're seeing here is an experiment where she had fruit flies and she deprived them of food for different periods of time. So on the left, on this figure, we have 0 hours of deprivation, so no food deprivation at all, going all the way up to over 120 hours of being deprived of food. So flies that were getting really hungry. What we see here is that hungry adult fruit flies display more aggressive behavior. So they are more motivated to fight over food resources. So another way to say that result is that fruit flies get hangry, perhaps just like humans, including myself. We also found that individual fruit flies are regulating their aggressive behavior depending on the social environment, not just the nutritional environment. So biological theory tells us that in any animal species, individuals should often cooperate with other individuals that they're more related to. So we expected fruit flies to have read the theory, to obey the theory, and to act right, and to reduce their aggressive behavior towards other fruit flies that they were more related to. So we could test that hypothesis by placing fruit flies with relatives or with non-relatives and looking at how aggressive they were in response. Okay, so we did that experiment. The take-home message is that male fruit flies could tell who they were related to, and they were nicer to their brothers. And that might be a bit surprising if you have grown up with brothers and experienced a different kind of behavior with your siblings. But male fruit flies are nicer to their brothers. So what we're seeing here is that when females are absent, and that's those two bars on the left, males basically aren't aggressive. There's not much to fight over. They want to, they're mostly interested in fighting for access to a female. If a female is present though, and that's those two bars on the right, then it's when males are with unrelated males that there's this big uptick in aggressive behavior. So that means that males are monitoring their social environment. They're able to detect who they're related to, and they're able to adjust their behavior in response to that information. So the next thing we wanted to find out was what genes are involved in that process. So what we did was sequence how genes were expressed in the heads of male fruit flies, whether they were exposed to brothers or not. And by doing that, we could see what genes were turned on or turned off in response to interacting with brothers. Okay, so here's what we found. When male fruit flies interacted with other males that they were related to, genes that were related to being able to smell were expressed less than when males interacted with unrelated males. So there's a big list of genes here. We can see just by the names of these genes that a lot of them relate to smell perception. There's things like odorant binding proteins, odorant receptors, olfactory specific genes. So all of these genes are related to scent perception in some way. The numbers here are telling us the change in how much those genes were expressed, depending on being with brothers or not. So it seems like something is going on with the sense of smell in regulating social behavior with relatives. So that led us to the hypothesis that, you need to be able to smell your brothers in order to be nice to them. Olfaction might be how you detect your relatives. We did some work to test that hypothesis, and it turns out it seems to be a bit more complicated. It seems like other sensory perception is probably involved as well. It's not just about olfaction. The take-home message I want to leave you with is that kinship influences social interactions, even in something as simple, seemingly simple as a fruit fly. So there's a lot of complexity that we might not understand or perceive if we didn't look for it. Okay, I want to move on and talk about another aspect of insect social life, and that's interactions with mating partners. So to start off with, I want to also focus on fruit flies. So even in an organism like that, as seemingly simple as a fruit fly, there's this interesting repertoire of behaviors around mating. So in this picture, what we're seeing is a male fruit fly. He's competing for the attention of a female. part of the mating process in fruit flies is a courtship song and dance that males perform to get female attention and persuade females to mate with them. So what we're seeing here is a male fruit fly. He is raising his wing. He's beating it extremely quickly to produce a high frequency song. We can't hear it, but female fruit flies can. He moves around her body, weaving around to perform a courtship dance at the same time. He is also vibrating his abdomen on the substrate to produce a low frequency song at the same time. So there's a bunch of stuff going on. And females are paying attention to what males are doing. We've done work in my lab to characterize that song that males produce. Here's a picture of that song showing the amplitude and the frequency of those wing vibrations. We can hear what that sounds like. So there's the song of a fruit fly. Let's hear that again. So females are paying attention to that song. And if she doesn't like what she hears, she can raise her abdomen. That's what this female is doing when he attempts to mate. And she can reject his mating attempt. And she might be doing that in this case. We can see that this male kind of has a withered wing, and he might not be producing the optimal song. He seems to not be producing a song that she likes, and she can reject his mating advances. So you might have heard that there's a lot of research on this species, on Drosophila melanogaster. It's a really important model organism for lots of areas of biology. And one of the reasons it's important is that we know so much about its physiology, its genetics, its behavior, how it lives its life. And we have a lot of powerful genetic tools that we can use to genetically manipulate fruit flies and to understand and learn about their behavior and how it's regulated. So we did a study in fruit flies. This is a video from my collaborator. And what we are looking at here is on the right, we have a vial containing normal fruit flies, wild type fruit flies. They're mostly sitting around. On the left, we have fruit flies where males have been genetically altered. And we have introduced a mutation in a gene called fruitless that regulates their mating behavior. And that one change is enough to make these males engage in an unusual courtship behavior where they direct courtship not only at females, but also at males. So we can see in the bottom of that vial on the left, a group of males going around in a circle. And that is a kind of chain or conga line of male fruit flies courting each other. And that change is induced by one single gene. A mutation in one gene in the fruit fly genome causes this major change in courtship behavior. Okay, so we have, lots of animals are like fruit flies, where there's interesting courtship behaviors. Males are trying to persuade females that they are good quality mates and that a female should mate with them. There's not always like that. So there's lots of animals in which competition for mates is fierce and leads to interesting adaptations. So I want to tell you about damselfly mating behavior. So here we have a pair of mating damselflies on the left. We have the male damselfly who's more brightly colored, he's in blue. And we have the female damselfly who's in a more muted green color. Damselfly mating is really interesting. What we're seeing here is the male having a grip in the back of the female's neck. He's doing that with parts of his genitalia that are modified to allow him to grasp the back of her neck. That's what we're seeing in that picture on the left. And there's a close-up of it on the right. So that's the male genitalia grabbing on the back of her neck. The next thing that happens is that the female reaches up to the male's secondary genitalia. So she has now curved her abdomen around, and she is accessing sperm that the male has already placed in that secondary part of his body. He's already transferred sperm there before he grabbed a hold of her neck. So they form this kind of heart shape when they're actually mating. But another interesting aspect of this behavior is that males have adaptations that help them compete with rival males, even at this stage of mating. So when that is happening, when females are accessing sperm from the male, like we're seeing in that picture on the left, males are at the same time using their genitalia to scrape out a female's reproductive tract from any sperm that's been deposited there by previous males. Here's a close-up of the male genitalia. You can see it's got all these spiky structures alongside of it. That's what males are using to scrape out the sperm of rival males before they deposit their own. So there's this kind of fierce competition playing out even after mating has started. And we've got lots of other interesting aspects of that. Bed bugs are a classic case. So here is a pair of mating bed bugs. The female is on her back, and we're seeing the male body kind of bending around her. In bed bugs, what we have is something called hypodermic genitalia, where males inject sperm and seminal proteins directly through the female body cavity, not through their reproductive organs, but directly into the female abdomen. Here's a close-up of the male genitalia that's really sharp that allows him to do that. So a male bypasses the female reproductive organs entirely and deposits it in what's sort of the equivalent of an insect bloodstream. So we can imagine that has costs for females. You know, there's a wound site that might be subject to infection. She's struggling with the male at the moment. So those kinds of costs and conflict between the sexes are another common part of insect reproductive systems. One of the animals that we studied to look at that kind of conflict is water striders. So these guys are insects that are common throughout the Maritimes. They live in freshwater bodies. They're scavengers. They eat dead stuff on the surface of water bodies, mostly dead insects, but sometimes fish and other dead vertebrates. They're widely distributed throughout the Maritimes. This is my chance to acknowledge some students in my lab who've done this work, characterizing diversity in this group across the Maritimes. We find 9 species of water striders throughout the region. Water striders have a bunch of interesting behaviors. Here is one. What we're seeing here is 2 water striders sitting on the surface of a tank in the lab, and we're looking down on them from above. It's a bit hard to see them because they're not moving. You can see the little black blobs that color is radiating from. Even though they are not moving, what they're doing is sending out ripples over the surface of the water. We're able to detect those ripples by pointing a laser at the surface of the water that can tell us when it's moving up and down. So here the red means there's an elevation of the water surface, and blue means that there's a depression. So even though it looks like they're sitting still, they're sending these vibrational waves over the surface of the water. There seems to be some directionality that they may be sending those waves at each other. So there's this interesting potential that they might be exchanging information by talking over the surface of the water. Isabel Huddleston is a master's student in my lab who is looking at that question. Another aspect of their mating behavior that we look at relates to conflict around mating. What we're seeing here is 2 water striders on the surface of the water. There's a male who is grabbing onto a female's leg, and she is resisting his attempt to mate with her. She is doing backflips across the surface of the water. She is not cooperating. He is not letting go. So this kind of harassment is something that female water striders are experiencing all day, every day. Males are skating around looking for females. So there's a bunch of interesting consequences to that interaction. One of the consequences is that males have all these adaptations that allow them to hold on to females that are trying to get away from them. So here's one species of water striders. In my hand, these guys I picked up at Cameron Lake, just outside Antigonish here. And what we're looking at is two male water striders with their back legs highly modified with little hooks and curves. And all of those hooks and curves are perfectly matched to the female body and allow a male to get a grip on a female. What we're seeing in the bottom two images is that males use their forelegs to wrap around the female eyeball and hold on to her while she's struggling to get away or while mating is happening. So there's lots of ways that males are modified to hold on to females. And then, in some species of water strider, females also have counter adaptations. So here's some of the water striders that we study. This is looking at two bugs, a male and a female from the side. Up on top, we have males that have highly curved and elongated pregenital segments. And when they mate, they have to wrap those pregenital segments around the female's spine to access her reproductive opening. And females have those spines because they help them to resist male mating attempts. So we know that females with longer spines are better able to resist males that are jumping on them and trying to mate with them. Females with the shorter spines have a harder time getting rid of males. So theory tells us that those two structures should co-evolve. We should see that in species or populations where females have bigger spines, we should also see males having bigger grasping traits that are better able to overcome those spines. And in fact, that's exactly what we see. So if we look at these data here, each of these points is a population of water striders. What we're seeing is that those populations where females have bigger spines are the same populations where males have larger and more exaggerated grasping traits. No question?
So when they're trying to resist the male mating attempt, do they behave differently if there's a male they do want to mate with, or are the spines something to overcome? So a male who could overcome the spine is fitter.
It's a fantastic question. So for those on Zoom, if it was hard to hear, the question is, is the resistance that females show to males a way that females could test males to overcome such that only good quality males could overcome female resistance? Is that how I captured it? Okay. Yeah, it's a great question. So that's a really interesting hypothesis. One line of evidence that suggests that's not what's happening is that when females are hungry, they are more resistant to mating. So to say that the other way around, when females are well-fed, they have lots of food. If it was all about choosing the best male, you might think that when females are well-fed, that's when they have the opportunity to invest energy in picking amongst the best male. And when they have less food, they'll be less interested in doing that. But in fact, we see exactly the opposite. Females that are hungry are those that resist males more strongly. So that is consistent with the idea that they are experiencing costs of interacting with males, that they have something better to do to get food, and that they are resisting males in order to reduce those costs. So it's not exactly a nail in the coffin, but it's at least consistent with the idea that it's more about resistance than about choosing amongst males. That's still a possibility, and it's really interesting. So we see this kind of covariation between males and females. One of the reasons that's interesting is that that is consistent with a sexual arms race happening over evolutionary time between the sexes. The fact that these are populations and we're seeing differences among these populations suggests that evolution is happening rapidly and causing divergence among those populations. One of the next questions we have are what genes are involved in the diversification of these traits? How do those genes evolve? Can we see rapid evolution in those genes? That's something that Charlotte is working on for her PhD. Overall, we have the conclusion that conflict between the sexes can cause rapid evolution and can cause divergence among populations. Okay, so we talked about courtship. We talked about conflict. There's another aspect of mating behavior that I want to touch on as part of insect social life. So there's a bunch of insects where males have this really interesting mating behavior. They give stuff to females around the time of mating. There's a name for that stuff. We call it nuptial gifts. So it's food that females give to, that males give to females either before mating, sometimes during mating, sometimes after mating. It might be food from the environment, like a bug that they catch, or food that males make themselves with specialized glands. So there's a bunch of insects where that happens. And that's really interesting because it leads to a bunch of interesting consequences. The possibility of competition, deception, perhaps manipulation. So I want to give you two examples of that kind of behavior. One is from a bug that we don't study in my group, but it's a really interesting insect. So this is a dance fly. So in dance flies, females form big swarms, and that's where mating happens. Females are forming a swarm of flies, and males enter the swarm to find a mate. And when males enter, they're carrying a dead bug that they offer to females as part of persuading females to mate with them. So that's what we're seeing in the top picture there. We're seeing a mating pair, a male and a female, and the female is eating a bug that the male has given to her before mating started. So that was part of his ticket to mating, offering a female that bug. I said there'd be deception. There's this interesting bunch of dancefly species where instead of males offering females a dead insect, they offer her a packet of silk that actually contains nothing. That's what we're seeing in the lower image there. The male has given a female a gift, but when she unwraps it, there is nothing inside. But it goes even further than that. There's another level to deception. So here, the large picture on the right is a female dancefly. So it turns out that male danceflies really like females that have big, wide abdomens. Because if you're a female insect, that means an abdomen that is packed with eggs. And males really like that. Females have evolved air sacs on the sides of their abdomens, and we're seeing that in orange here. Air sacs that inflate and make their abdomen look super wide. They also, when they're in flight, they wrap their hairy legs, their legs are extra hairy in this species, and they wrap them around their abdomen. And that also makes their abdomens look bigger. And you can imagine that looks like an abdomen that is full of eggs. That's a great female to mate with. But it gets even more interesting than that. So a new study just published this year showed that in danceflies, where females have that adaptation, where females falsely advertise how many eggs they have, in those species, males have extra good vision. They have evolved extra visual acuity, and they are really good at seeing fine detail. And that suggests that they've evolved that ability in order to detect female deception. So there's kind of an arms race happening in both deception and the detection of that deception that's playing out in these bugs. In the last few minutes of this talk, I want to touch on one more bug that my lab studies that also involves a nuptial gift. And this is the ladybug, the family of ladybugs. So what happens in ladybugs is they mate. During mating, sperm is transferred in a packet. It's called a spermatophore. After mating is over, females eject the capsule of that spermatophore, and they turn around and eat it. And that's what we've just seen that female do in the video. similar thing happens in a bunch of ladybug species. The female ejects the spermatophore capsule and then turns around and eats that spermatophore capsule. So interestingly, there's a bunch of variation in that behavior across ladybugs. There's a number of species where females eject and eat spermatophores or gelatinous stuff after mating. There's another bunch of species where females are ejecting different kinds of material. There's another bunch of species where females don't eject anything. So that kind of variation across a group of closely related species suggests that there's rapid evolution, which suggests that there's strong natural selection acting on this. There must be some strong costs and benefits driving that kind of diversity. Okay. We have this situation where males are giving stuff to females. Does that represent cooperation between the sexes, or is there potential for conflict? One question is, females are eating that material. Is it giving females anything? Is it benefiting females? Well, one thing I can tell you from studies of the two-spot ladybug is that in that species, eating these gifts doesn't let females do any of the things that you think food would let females do. Doesn't let females lay more eggs. They don't produce larger eggs. They don't live longer lives. They don't have higher fertility. It doesn't seem to give those kinds of benefits to females. But it does do something. It affects female remating behavior, how females interact with the next male they encounter. And when a female eats one of these nuptial gifts, the female becomes more resistant to mating with the next male she encounters. We're seeing that in this figure on the left here. The resistance time that females display with the next male is much higher if she eats a gift, and females are more likely to display resistance. So in this example, what seems like it should be a cooperative food exchange is actually something different. Males are having chemical influence on female behavior in a way that would certainly benefit the male providing that material. Unclear if it would benefit or harm females. Okay, I'm going to end on that note. There's a number of take-home messages I could leave you with. But the big picture one I want to leave you with is that that insect social life is worth understanding. It's richly complex. It's full of fascinating adaptations. And because insects matter to our own lives, it's worthy of study. So thanks very much. Take any questions?
All right, so I want to start by again thanking Dr. Perry for a very interesting and eye-opening conversation about the social lives of insects. I'll start by actually opening the floor to the in-person audience, and anyone who does have a question online, feel free to type it into the chat box, and I will relay the question to Dr. Perry. So is there anyone here who'd like to ask a question?
What kind of evolutionary pressures would have caused that to happen? Because it seems like that's just a bad idea in general, causing a big gaping wound in the female. And then is there any instances of standard reproduction for both bedbugs? Do they do both, or is it only traumatic insemination?
Those are excellent questions. So the first part of the question,
Evolutionary pressures.
evolutionary questions. It probably relates to stronghold competition. The need to, it's probably about competition with other males. Females are scarce, you need find a female. If other males are there, and the first male to deliver sperm that gets to sire the offspring. So that's probably part of what's driving them. Another part of the story is that females have evolved all these interesting counter adaptations. So in a bunch of bedbug species, females have a secondary reproductive opening that arose after the piercing of failure. So females have developed a protective element that reduces the risk of infection and reduces the spots of that behavior. And are there other bedbug species that don't do that? That's such an interesting question. I'm sorry to say, I don't know. I don't study dialogues. They're so interesting. Wish I did, but yeah, I don't know the answer to that one. Excellent question.
Jim, can you just move it?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So, just a quick question from one of the online speakers. Why do you have information on female fruit flies, but not, sorry, male fruit flies, but not female? Does the Y chromosome make it easier to study the males, or are you partway through that study and information on female fruit flies is still to come?
Oh, thanks for that question. That's a great question about female fruit flies. We actually have done a bunch of studies of female fruit flies as well, and I didn't talk about those results today. One of the things we did with fruit fly aggression is test how it evolves in response to the social environment. So I talked about in this talk how fruit flies respond to the immediate social environment, but we can also change their social environment, and their generation time is short enough we can actually track how they evolve over a couple years. So we did that. We found that male fruit flies aggression did not change. It was pretty static. All the interesting stuff happened with females. When we increased the amount of competition females experienced, so there was more competition against females, females evolved increased aggression in those kinds of environments. So there's this, I completely agree with you that it's really interesting to consider female aggression as well as males.
I have a quick question, hopefully. You had some, as a numbers person, you had some information about probability of aggression. And so I got to ask you, how exactly do you measure aggression? Is it based on a single event, or is it based on if they trigger this many headbutts or so forth? So how exactly, like, what is the outcome measure you're looking at?
It's a great question. One of the nice things about fruit flies is we can hold them in really controlled environments. In those arenas that you saw in the pictures and videos, so we can quantify aggression in a really standardized way. So in this particular set of experiments, we have a 20-minute trial. There's a food patch in the middle of the dish. We quantify the number of aggressive events initiated by a focal male and compare that metric across conditions. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the in-person audience? Are there any other questions online? I'll leave that for a moment. I did have a few other minor questions, and we were just talking about the bed bugs and the more traumatic method. Now, you didn't mention how the water strider females, how they had adapted to, I guess, for easier rejection. Are you aware of other interesting adaptations from other species, such as the bed bugs? Because obviously, the penetrating component associated with this is quite aggressive.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So you're wondering about other species and other kinds of female counter adaptations.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a super interesting thing to think about. So in ladybugs, for example, there's a bunch of behaviors that females display when they're rejecting males. They roll on their backs, they run away or fly away. They're in an open environment. They kick at males with their hind legs. A bunch of behavioral adaptations like that. In water striders, it's also the case that, if you have a bigger body, if you're a bigger female, you can better throw off a male that's trying to hold on to you. And there's some evidence that body size also responds to that evolves in response to male harassment. And there's this whole other fascinating set of adaptations in damselflies and dragonflies, especially damselflies, where some females have evolved to become male mimics. So instead of that drab green female damselfly that we saw on the screen, some females have evolved to become brightly colored and the same coloration as males. So when they look like males like that, males stop harassing them because they perceive them to be another male. So in that way, females can hide in plain sight and avoid male harassment.
And I think we do have one more online if you're willing.
Great, yes.
Okay, so can you give us a glimpse of where you think this research might be applicable? Will it be used to study more collective insects, such as bees, and how that affects, let's say, agriculture? Or how shared genes between insects and animals may influence behavior of mammals, including us?
That's a really interesting question. Yeah. So where could we apply this kind of research? Because it's all about insect reproductive behavior, there are opportunities to think about pest control. For example, that kind of gene manipulation that causes males to court other males. You know, that general kind of intervention could shut down mating behavior, that could reduce reproduction, and perhaps be a good method for pest control. That's still at an early stage, but there's that kind of possibility that we could manipulate mating behavior for a pest insect. And I think there's also the possibility to understand other animals that we're interested in, including our own species. So fruit flies share, you know, almost all of their genes with vertebrates like us. They're a lot easier to do experiments with. So if we study genes that regulate fruit fly behavior, we have the possibility to translate some of that knowledge to other animals of interest, possibly including humans.
One more.
You mentioned that fruit flies have a high song and low song.
Yeah.
When the rainbow thorax. Is there a harmonic relation between the two, and does that cause more success, like if it's some sort of resonance between the two?
That is a truly fascinating idea. So the question is there an interaction or a harmonic resonance between the high-pitched fruit fly song that they're making with wings and the low-pitched song that they make by vibrating their abdomen? That's such an interesting question, and we know very little about that. The vibrational behavior was only discovered a few years ago. So I think the research is still catching up to this whole interesting aspect of their behavior that we didn't know about until recently. It's a really interesting question.
All right, if you're okay, I have one small question. So clearly, based on this representation, you love insects is an understatement. So two parts in some sense. One, what is among all the species that you have been studying, what is your most favorite bug? And what has been the most surprising social behavior you've come across?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, let's see. The bug that's probably closest to my heart is ladybugs, and that's because that's when I started my research career studying ladybug behavior for my master's and then my PhD. I started off how they have bacteria that are passed from mother to offspring that kill male embryos. And they do that so that those eggs that are male don't develop. And then the female offspring that hatch get to eat their brothers that have failed early in development. I thought that was crazy. I didn't end up working on that aspect of their biology, but that's what led me into, that was my gateway into ladybugs. And they have so many other interesting behaviors as well. And you asked about the most surprising aspect of insect behavior, or that I've found. Yeah, and you know, the finding that the nuptial gift, the so-called nuptial gift that we can see a female eating in this picture on the screen right now, the finding that affects female remating behavior is still really interesting to me. You know, that's something that seems like food. Females are eating it. It is proteinaceous. It seems like it should be nutritious. And yet it seems like instead of being something nutritious, it's about influencing female behavior to male benefit. That's still something interesting to me.
Okay, then. So I'm going, unless there are any pressing questions, Dr.
The
Upland?
mathematician is quite, so you've used adaptation and evolution, I guess, several times in this presentation. So I guess you will have some help from you, human and mathematician. So how do you actually distinguish between adaptation, evolution, and how do you know you're there, that this is actually happening, right? And maybe some examples of this in this particular setting of the insect species, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, you're asking such an interesting question that kind of gets at the heart of the field of studying animal behavior. How do we know what is really an adaptation? How do we study animal behavior objectively without bringing our own biases to it, so we can really understand what's happening? There's a lot to unpack in that. That's a great question. A couple of things we can do. We can make predictions based on adaptive hypotheses. You know, if the nuptial gift is about food, then hungry females should be more inclined to mate to get that food. And yet we don't see that happening. In fact, it's just the opposite of that. So we can kind of make predictions based on adaptive hypotheses like that. A second thing we can do, because many insects have short lives, we can actually set up experimentally evolving populations in the lab and study them in real time and track types evolve in response to how we manipulate the environment. And that's really strong evidence that what we're seeing is in response to the conditions that we've set up. Those are two approaches that kind of address that problem that you're bringing up. Yeah.
Okay, well then, as a closing statement, I would like to first, on behalf of Jillian Phillips from the Discovery Center, on behalf of the NSIS, thank you, Dr. Perry, for a very interesting lecture, and thank you for your time and sharing your research with us this evening. It has been very fascinating. And with that said, I would like to close tonight's presentation, and again, help me give a warm thank you to Dr. Perry for her talk this evening.
Thank you, everybody.
See, my brain's gonna go here. I'm just gonna stop.